The Rabid Squirrel Limited proudly presents The Duchess of Malfi in 5.5 minutes. Act 1. The play begins in the audience chamber of the widowed Duchess. Antonio, the Duchess's steward, enters with his friend Delio, who welcomes Antonio back from the French court, where Antonio has stayed for some time. The two friends talk as they observe the others who pass through the chamber. The first to enter the chamber are the Cardinal and Bosola. Although Bosola has recently been released after serving 7 years for the murder he committed for the Cardinal refuses to acknowledge his death. Bosola complains about having to wear towels. Later in the play, Bosola seems to put aside his bitterness and becomes a spy for Ferdinand, the Cardinal's brother. Ferdinand then enters with his entourage, and having heard that Antonio has proven himself in a knightly competition, he gives Antonio a jewel and praises him on his eloquent speech before leaving. After everyone has left, Delio asks Antonio for his impressions concerning the Cardinal, Ferdinand, and the widowed Duchess. Antonio promptly describes the Cardinal as jealous and vengeful, Ferdinand as perverse and turbulent, and the Duchess in many flattering words. Delio, a little creeped out, leaves. Elsewhere, Ferdinand approaches his twin sister, the Duchess, and forces her to promise that she will not remarry. The Duchess agrees. Immediately after making her promise to Ferdinand, the Duchess meets with Antonio, and after a friendly discussion, Antonio, of his own free will, takes the Duchess's ring. Antonio and the Duchess are secretly married with Cariola, the Duchess's servant, as witness. They then proceed to their marriage bed, alone. Act 2. Several months later. As we move on to the second act, we find that the Duchess is pregnant, and has been unsuccessfully trying to hide her pregnancy under loose clothing. Bosola, ever watchful, suspects the Duchess is carrying child, and attempts to confirm his suspicions by serving the Duchess apricots, which the Duchess greedily consumes and then promptly regurgitates. For some reason, the apricots send the Duchess into labor. Antonio fears there is not enough time to hide the Duchess away, and devises a plan which will allow her to give birth in secrecy. Bosola has confirmation of the pregnancy, and sends a letter to Rome. The scene then shifts to Rome, where the message is delivered to Ferdinand which tells of the Duchess's pregnancy and birth. Ferdinand is almost driven to madness, and launches into a long speech with questionable overtones concerning his sister. The Cardinal also reads the letter, and the two discuss their sister's betrayal. Act 3. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, no filming was done for Act 3. However, here is the summary. Several years pass, the Duchess has 2 more children. Ferdinand finally confronts the Duchess and vows never to look upon her again. The Duchess confides in Bosola, who rats her out. The Duchess is arrested and imprisoned in her palace, while Antonio takes his eldest son and flees from Milan. Act 4. The act opens with Ferdinand receiving a report on how the Duchess is bearing her imprisonment. Bosola tells Ferdinand that the Duchess is doing so nobly, so Ferdinand proceeds to torture the Duchess by showing her a severed hand which he tells her is Antonio's, along with waxen figures which appear to be Antonio and their children, dead. Ferdinand also introduced a slew of madmen to scream before the Duchess. Eventually Bosola enters the chamber with 2 executioners, and informs the Duchess that he has come to make her tomb. The 2 executioners drag Cariola off, and eventually she is strangled. Bosola strangles the Duchess and then the 2 children off stage. Ferdinand re-enters and tells Bosola to leave, but Bosola demands his money. Ferdinand refuses to pay Bosola, creates a clever distraction, and runs away. The Duchess stirs only to cry out Antonio, and then finally dies. Act 5. The scene now shifts to Milan, where within the Cardinal's palace the Cardinal and Julia, his mistress, talk. Julia senses something troubles the Cardinal, and begs for him to confide in her. After much talk, the Cardinal makes Julia promise never to tell anyone what she will hear. Julia promises, and the Cardinal confesses that he has had the Duchess brutally strangled along with her 2 children. The Cardinal then completes their absolutely delightful dialogue by offing Julia with a poisoned Bible. Julia dies. Bosola enters, and after being ordered to dispose of Julia's body, swears to serve only Antonio, using all his care to put the wronged Antonio into safety. Antonio enters, and Bosola stabs him. Just before Antonio finds death, Bosola tells him that the Duchess is dead. Antonio dies. The servant who let Antonio in hears some stabbing, investigates, and is also stabbed. The servant dies. The Cardinal then re-enters and is likewise stabbed. Ferdinand responds to the Cardinal's cries for help, but instead of assisting his brother, he stabs him. Bosola stabs Ferdinand, who stabs the Cardinal, who stabs Ferdinand, who stabs Bosola, who stabs the cardinal, and so on. Ferdinand dies, Bosola dies, the cardinal dies. Delio, back from Act 1, enters with the hopes of establishing Antonio's oldest son as the new Duke of Malfi. However, upon seeing all the dead bodies, he promptly leaves. And we are brought to the end of the play.